from their surroundings what was needed and made of it something more.
What's up, gang, and welcome back aboard the Paper Starship, where it's about keeping the Mediaverse connected from the past and present to the mainstream and obscure. I'm your porter with the goods, Marcus, back with a special delivery of the most obscure mainstream game of recent memory. The game that inspired this fragile bridge of a channel, and probably my absolute favorite game of the PS4 generation. It's the 2019 critically acclaimed, subversive Kojima Productions debut title, Death Stranding. Now, as with every Hideo Kojima game, there is a plethora of things to talk about. The problem becomes what's worth discussing and what belongs in an issue of Who Gives a Fuck magazine. It's hard to pin down a piece of media that incorporates elements of Ghostbusters, Jaws, and 2001 without sounding a bit insane. And of course, with something as LUDO narrative driven and open to interpretation, these talking points can become an incoherent mess quickly. But this isn't our first rodeo. We kinda know what we're doing around here, or at least pretending to know. We've done our research and discernment, and we're ready to bring our reductionist observations to this sci-fi pop culture referential masterpiece. I won't be covering extra content from the PC release or the PS5 exclusive director's cut. I'm sure there'll be plenty of channels exploring the new equipment and elements that have gone into that version. And bear with me for a moment, because I do have a gripe about this with the way Death Stranding has been released 3 separate times, and each in an exclusive manner. If you bought the PS4 version, you did not receive access to the Cyberpunk 2077 DLC that came out last year. That was PC exclusive. If you bought the PC version, you do not have the ability to upgrade to the director's cut, as that one is PS5 exclusive. If this game gets a 4th release, it'll probably only be playable on the moon. Yeah, I'm a little bit salty about being a day one player, buying the limited edition DS PS4 Pro, and not having access to the director's cut without shelling out $500 for a new state-of-the-art console.
I am so mad at you! At the situation!
But that's my 2 cents about how the re-release of the game has been handled, and why we're sticking to the purest form of Death Stranding, the OG version. We'll be exploring aspects of Death Stranding's world by diving into its in-depth gameplay mechanics, connect the strands to some of the game's biggest inspirations, and look at the themes and philosophical concepts that went into this Kojima title. Like always, I'll be pulling from articles and interviews, along with adding my own whim of a madman insights.
The whim of a madman! I like that.
But get your inventory sorted and prepare to head out, porters. We've got a chiral network to rebuild. By the way, this is your spoiler warning for Death Stranding, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Postman, Contact, Ghostbusters 1, Stalker, End of Ava, and the John Carpenter Escape movies. Seeing how Death Stranding is the debut title for Hideo's studio, Kojima Productions, we need to start with the inglorious circumstances that led to Koji Pro's inception. For 30 years at the publisher Konami, Hideo Kojima had made quite the name for himself in the gaming industry with his visionary games that double S cinematic experiences.
Kept you waiting, huh?
All wrapped up in thought-provoking commentaries that hovered over the medium-subverting titles he created, namely the Metal Gear Solid series, which saw an illustrious 11-game run which earned Kojima quite a bit of pull within the company. Over the years, he mostly got to do what he wanted as long as he kept making Metal Gear. And it's no secret Kojima had a penchant for going over budget to achieve his wild, outlandish ideas. But because everything he made was so successful, Konami kinda just went, Yeah, okay, how much did you need for the cutscene where the child with psychic powers takes out a helicopter with a flaming whale? $2 million? Here you go, Hideo. Hell, he even made and distributed Silent Hill's PT with money that was supposed to be used for Metal Gear Solid 5 right under his boss's noses without them knowing. Konami was nonplussed about this, and rightfully so. I mean, it was a very cyberpunk move by Kojima to take corpo money, make a game in secret, and release it for free. And despite Konami pulling PT from the PlayStation Network, it seemed like all was forgiven until a corporate restructuring took place in March 2015. Konami was under new management, and let's just say the new bosses were not pro-Hideo. Tensions rose, and Kojima and management clashed over the following months, which happened to be the final months of development on MGS-V, and we've seen how Kojima vented his workplace frustrations in that title.
Did it. You erased all the markings, and every one of them will always be with you.
V released September 1st of that year, and only 3 months later, Kojima left his stomping grounds on December 15th, 2015. And it was just 24 hours later that he announced the creation of his own independent studio. Almost like he had it all planned out. He also managed to whisk away longtime mainstays Yoji Shinkawa and Shuyo Murata, who in a sense creatively complete him. But what would be their first foray outside the grasps of Konami?
Hello? Hello, everyone. I'm back.
Just 6 months later, Kojima was back at it, having secured a contract with Sony for a new game. This would be Kojima's first new AAA IP since the MGS franchise, and the initial trailer didn't really tell us much, except for naked Norman Reedus with a baby and some floaty ghosts on a beach, with really cool music. And it would be called Death Stranding.
Shut up and take my money!
In terms of star power, there's been no video game cast assembled like this, ever. Kojima managed to keep Norman Reedus and Guillermo del Toro involved after their shared work on PT, but the cast also featured director Nicholas Winding Refn, who most know for the Ryan Gosling films Drive and Only God Forgives, the original Bionic Woman Lindsay Wagner, who would have multiple roles, Bond girl Léa Seydoux, the always awesome Mads Mikkelsen, voice acting czar Troy Baker, model and actress Margaret Qualley, and world-traveled stage actor Tommy Earl Jenkins. There's a slew of cameos made by other film and video game celebrities throughout also, and this participation by the film industry shows how big of a deal Death Stranding was supposed to be. If MGS2 was Kojima's Hollywood game, it could be argued that Death Stranding is his cinema or art house video game, especially with appearances from Winding Refn and Guillermo del Toro, who are Cannes Film Festival regulars. Hell, Kojima and Norman Reedus actually went to Tribeca Film Festival to discuss Death Stranding in a Q&A during production, and if that doesn't reek of indie hipsterness, I don't know what does. And if anything, it just made me want to play the game that much more. Speaking of Kojima games and high production value, you can never ignore the music category. Ever since MGS2, the soundtracks to Kojima games have been epic, and Death Stranding is the magnum opus of game soundtracks. Not only did Kojima retain MGS-V composer Ludwig Forssell for the game's original score, which contains the usual really cool ethereal ambient synthwave sound, but a major game changer was the access to Sony's musical library, which Kojima used to litter the game with Low Roar's melancholically masterful music catalog, along with original songs by Churches and Silent Poets that elevated the mood and created a euphoric energy throughout. Death Stranding's debut trailer gave us a little taste of all these elements, and about every 6 months for the next 3 years, a new one would drop, revealing a few more details while creating hundreds more questions, making the hype grow with the mystery. That was actually becoming the biggest part of Death Stranding's hype. Simply, what the hell is this game? From what little gameplay we saw, it looked like you were delivering packages, but after MGS2 and more recently the Ruse of V, people were going, it's Kojima, so there's definitely got to be more to it. We just have to wait for it to release, and then finally we'd know what it was about. And it would be on November 8th, 2019 that the world got the unfiltered Kojima vision it had longed for. Death Stranding was released, and it was a game about delivering packages, for the most part. and some people really, really hated that. This was the first true love it or absolutely hate it Kojima game. I dreaded the possibility of hating this game after waiting 2.5 years, especially when the vast majority of the hate it crowd simply cried, "walking simulator," or "you fall down all the time." And we'll address that later on, but needless to say, I'm glad I chose to nut up and play and form my own opinion on the game. But before we get into some of the more specific things I want to break down surrounding the game and its design, I think it would help to have at least a bare bones summary of what actually happens in Death Stranding. So if you haven't played the game yet and don't want it spoiled, this is your point of no return. This is also where I recommend you take the game's opening song advice and don't be so serious. Death Stranding also lands in the scarce realm of cyberpunk books like Hardwired and Neuromancer that is so unique it requires its own lexicon. So let me preface this synopsis with a few definitions so as not to sound like I'm speaking a foreign language. BTs are beached things, or the Black Ghosts. Timefall is deadly rain that rapidly ages everything it touches. The beach is pretty much the astral plane. And the chiral network it's essentially a government internet service provider. That's the best way to describe it. If you thought the plots to Metal Gear Solid games were complex, then you're in for a ride, because those were stories where people actually reined in some of Kojima's crazier ideas. Death Stranding, however, is all Kojima all the time, which means it's 100% strange, but god do I love it. We'll try to keep things bare bones without getting too derailed by intricate matters like how Kojima revolutionized shitting in a video game with this title by allowing you to make piss and shit grenades from your excrement. Yeah, buckle up. Alright, let's do this. Death Stranding takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where an unspecified cataclysmic event known as the Death Stranding has occurred and wiped out a good portion of the world's population. But never mind that, because it's all about America, baby. The Death Stranding has sent what survivors remain into hermetic sheltered existences. You, however, are Sam Porter Bridges, the man who delivers. Porters have become crucial to the isolated, sheltered lifestyle people have been forced to live in, especially with the ever-present threat of age-accelerating timefall and BTs still roaming the outside world. But that's because transportation is a precise business. That was not good. But you're not just any porter, you're also the president's son with some vague supernatural powers known as dooms. The president on her deathbed has one final request, and that's for you to help the United Cities of America reconnect back to the chiral network and make the nation whole again. You kindly tell everyone to fuck off, but they essentially own your ass at the moment, so you begrudgingly take on the journey, making deliveries and connections as you trek across the desolate yet beautiful wasteland of America. You're on your own out here, save for a few other porters and other assholes known as mules who are trying to steal your cargo because they've become obsessed with delivering packages. Okay, yeah, stick with me here, because the reason you're able to travel this BT-ridden landscape better than anyone is that you have this supernatural, stillborn baby in a giant capsule that can help you sense ghosts. Which is the source of a lot of morality issues in Death Stranding, because you really have to start asking some questions when the government you work for is tricking babies into thinking they're still in the womb and not fully alive in order to connect the world of the dead in our past. Also, it sometimes malfunctions and sucks you into a giant time vortex, throwing you into some of the bloodiest wars in history, but, you know, that's the price of cutting-edge super shady government technology. But you and your ghost-sensing capsule baby make your way across America, making deliveries and connecting people back up to the government-mandated internet service using a device called a Cupid that is the coolest-looking crypto ledger I've ever seen. Yeah, the chiral network is also blockchain. There's even proof of ownership and history for your deliveries. Along your odyssey out west, you'll encounter plenty of preppers and people just trying to survive this apocalyptic world, but that doesn't mean the game is devoid of characters. There's your sort of sidekick, fellow porter named Fragile. She can teleport. Sweet. There's a doctor scientist made of dead body parts, a scientist who dies and revives every 24 minutes, and a guy in a really cool mask who sends you on fetch quests. Oh, and there's an inventor scientist who breastfeeds her ghost baby. Are you still with me? But what would a Kojima game be without the over-the-top edgelord villains? There's Higgs, the homo demon separatist leader, who's pretty much in here because Kojima wanted to put Golden Bat in his game.
Golden Bat is one of the most invincible characters that I have ever seen. Also, he can teleport. Did I mention he's basically magic? As a skeleton magician from beyond time and space, Golden Bat's power level is only limited by your imagination and how fast they could draw it.
I don't know what else to say on that. Rounding out the characters is Cliff, who is just too fucking cool. Why? 'Cause Skeletroopers and cigarettes, bro. Duh. Anyways, you end up trudging your ass across the map for like 30 hours, taking on mules, BTs, and homo demons, while having Higgs annoy your ass every step of the way, summoning tar monsters to impede your path. But mostly you'll be traversing some of the most gorgeous and difficult terrain gaming has offered to date, to eventually get to what I would assume is California in this world. And of course there's some giant ass BT you have to kill with your blood powered machine guns and grenades because, I don't know, Kojima wanted a kaiju sized monster in the game. But you cleanse the area and then you're on the beach, the astral plane, and you get to satisfyingly beat the crap out of Higgs 3 times over. And man, it's just so much bone crunching satisfaction after dealing with this dude the whole game. I truly savored these slow-mo shots of his face almost liquefying from my punches. Ah, that's the stuff. Afterward, there's a bunch of weird, nihilistic, end-of-civilization existentialism that goes on here with Amelie. Yeah, I haven't even mentioned her yet. Why? Too fucking complicated. Long story short, it's End of Ava, directed by Kojima. And for those of you that still means nothing, basically a bunch of weird, fucked up, maybe everyone dying wouldn't be so bad type shit. Honestly, what happens on the beach cutscenes could be an hour-long dissection in itself, as so many aspects of Kojima games could be. But we can't get stuck here. We're so close to the end, we gotta keep moving. So you make your way back to the world of the living, where things are semi-better, but now you have to fight a giant flying BT whale monster. Why? Because fuck your why, it's Death Stranding. Give me my blood-powered rocket launchers. So then you go back to the astral plane to tell Amelie, hey, life's alright, and maybe don't destroy all of humanity. Then your buddies come and drag you back to the world of the living for good. You and your bizarre backup crew all celebrate a newly united America with duplicitous Masked Man as our president. Then he finds you in the hallway. And then he cries, and proceeds to confess some heavy sins that pretty much incited your whole fucked up existence. Yeah. Sorry. I got a side note for a second because Tommy Earl Jenkins is an awesome person and he gives a great performance here, but I do find it funny that there's a lot of support for this character despite them being shady as fuck and essentially choosing hoes before bros in the end. Anyways, he's kinda hoping that you'll just shoot him and instead, you just kinda leave. And then you decide to pull the old Snake Plissken Escape from LA disappear off the grid move with you and your unpotted baby hiking off into the sun of a bright new future. The end. Now I know some of you may have been hoping for a complete plot breakdown, and despite divulging a lot, I still left a lot unsaid regarding characters and the story for a reason. And Time Magazine might have put it best, stating, Death Stranding is a little like an acid trip. You can try to explain it with words, but only having the experience for yourself can really convey what it's like. Now it could be argued that every game essentially boils down to the experience, but Death Stranding differs a bit from most games by relying heavily on a concept known as LUDO narrative. Essentially, the style of play dictating a player's personal created narrative within the game world. For those that said Death Stranding is a walking simulator, well, you must have some of the most exciting walks, because while it does have the most in-depth walking mechanics like no other game created, it's also predicated very much on stylish action. In short, you could call it a crazy game. And aside from stylish, I think maybe the only other term to describe Death Stranding's gameplay would be emergent. Someone who's truly embraced this idea is a Twitter user called Smog Snake, who's created some of the most fun and unique gameplay videos, truly pushing the boundaries of what's possible within Death Stranding. If you think it can't be done, Smog Snake might prove you wrong, and in an awesome way. But let's dig into Death Stranding's gameplay, and we'll start with combat, which on its own offers you so many options from close to long range. For the in-your-face approach, you can pummel opponents with your bare fists, bash them in the face with your cargo, or use the strand to hogtie them. If you like to kill them softly from a distance, there's your non-lethal machine gun and riot shotgun for crowd control. And if you want the best of both worlds, the bola gun is the best combat tool in Death Stranding, offering a ranged non-lethal attack, which allows you to then get up close and personal melee shots in at no risk. Literally, you'll be kicking your enemies when they're down. But the options to bind, beat down, or go ballistic are interchangeable on the fly as well. I mean, any game where in the span of 30 seconds you can run someone over with your motorcycle, beat a person unconscious with your fists, and smash a package against an enemy's head is a fucking crazy game. Even calling the game a walking simulator from the standpoint of how you travel is ridiculous. Your modes of transportation vary as much as styles of combat. Just on foot alone, you have tools like climbing anchors and ladders for scaling, exoskeletons for speed and larger cargo capacity, and you can even ride your floating carrier like it's sci-fi shopping cart surfing. You can build a zipline network to travel from A to B, and it's thankfully so much cooler than it looked on South Park. For vehicles, you have your big rigs for over-the-road racing, and of course there's the Kaneda bike, both of which are awesome, but are mostly useful once you've reconstructed the roads. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention you're single-handedly responsible for completing America's infrastructure deal? You can build roads, you can construct some fragile bridges.
That's right.
The point I'm making is, who the fuck called this game a walking simulator?
Burn him! Burn him!
Probably the biggest innovation for Kojima's new foray was its intriguing online gameplay mechanic known as the social strand system.
Death Stranding is an asynchronous affair which you can interact directly with the things other players have built in the world. Along your journey you'll find bridges, sections of road, zip lines, and more left by other players that aid you on your way. You can even give and receive likes on them. You may never encounter another player, but the knowledge and acknowledgement from another person whose journey has crossed the same path as you creates a sense of community and togetherness I've never experienced in a single-player game. Kojima even went a step further, making sure you could only leave positive feedback, because God knows there's enough negativity to go around online as is. Although I guess if you want to be a dick, you would just dismantle everything you come across.
Kojima has gone as far to deem Death Stranding an entirely new genre, terming it a action-type strand game. Now that's pretty ballsy, just creating your own new genre, and I actually hope that it catches on. Sadly, until then, Death Stranding will have to be classified as an action-adventure game with unique asynchronous online gameplay features. But I do see his point. Sometimes there's just no existent way to describe things, and you gotta come up with your own definitions. So I guess the lesson is, don't be afraid to create your own definitions. Okay, that's a bad example. But while we're discussing Death Stranding's gameplay, let's look at an area of Kojima games that used to be praised in his earlier works: the boss fights. It would seem that MGS3 may have been the pinnacle of boss fight designs for Kojima, because aside from Rex vs. Ray and Liquid Ocelot vs. Snake at the end of MGS4, nothing has really been noteworthy in terms of boss battle design. Certainly nothing in V is genre-bending or mind-melting, and to be honest, Death Stranding doesn't have the most unique of fights either. That doesn't mean that they're bad. Regardless of if you're taking on Skeletroopers or giant BTs, boss fights equate to point-and-throw or point-and-shoot affairs. But the atmospheres of these fights create a dramatic mood, with some environments constantly shifting, adding a platforming element to some of the encounters. Like I said, they're cool, but nothing too insane in terms of design or tricks that can be pulled off. The boss fights with Higgs may be the most unique, but it's really because it's the only fight that has hand-to-hand and actually forces you to use the strand. I'd say there's around 8 to 9 boss battles total, but technically you can have infinite boss fights. Anytime that you alert the BTs and they drag you through the tar, it triggers one of the chiral beasts and you can exterminate them one after another. Even the time vortex fights that take you to World War I, II, and Vietnam can be accessed by looking at the Army Men figures in Sam's room, where an option for Nightmares of War appears that lets you replay the sequences. Being brutally honest, the boss fights in Death Stranding are one of the few areas that felt like a checkbox that just needed to be crossed off. Case in point is this fight, where you can take shelter, access the terminal, and fabricate more equipment in the middle of the fight. Come on, Kojima. Admittedly, it doesn't seem fair to complain about boss fights when like 90% of this game's design is innovative and unique. I guess the best summation is that Death Stranding isn't about quirky boss fights and set pieces. It's a constant alternation between stylish action and a meditative exercise in which the terrain is your enemy. More than anything though, it's fun. But now that we've connected the knots of plot and gameplay, it's time to dive into one of my favorite areas of dissection for Kojima games: concept designs and inspirations. Ever since the original Metal Gear Solid, one of the best added bonuses to a Hideo Kojima game has been the artwork of Yoji Shinkawa. His character and mech designs are the stuff of dreams, and it's not just the designs themselves, but his personal flowing abstract style that gives them life. Death Stranding is a bit different when it comes to Shinkawa designs, and it's partly because he didn't have to make any characters. Death Stranding is the first time Shinkawa didn't have to make a character who was a composite of actors Kojima liked. They just had the actors. So Shinkawa's task for DS lied more in fashion design and the equipment of the world. Much like previous works, when you look at Shinkawa designs, there are things you can tell were melded and blended together from real-world items, like the truck, which seems like a Transpo truck dune buggy hybrid, the exoskeleton, which totally looks like some Raytheon inspiration and eventually came to fruition. And there's items that you can tell Kojima saw a movie or anime and said, "Hey, Yoji, come draw this and make it cooler." Like the Kaneda motorbike, or the Bola gun, which is a combination of a net gun and Snake Plissken's gun. Also, Escape from LA is the only movie in my existence I've seen someone use a bola. So, maybe it was based on ancient Incan roots, but I prefer to think Kojima got inspired by watching Cuervo Jones use the weapon. And for the sake of a couple more examples, we'll use items from the director's cut, like the cargo catapult and maser gun. The cargo catapult is basically a repurposed anti-aircraft missile launcher, and the maser gun is a callback to the maser cannon from the kaiju films Kojima loves so much. It's quite different seeing Shinkawa build an entire world from scratch rather than creating designs to suit the real world. Once again, Shinkawa's outdone himself with the work he's put into creating the world of Death Stranding. And if there's anyone I want designing my post-apocalyptic world, it's Yoji Shinkawa. At least the end times will be stylish. And if after this video you're craving some aesthetically pleasing Death Stranding content, do yourself a favor and check out YouTubers Ethnic Coleslaw and Descartes Zero, who have both created some really cool GMVs and overall fun DS videos, and I've linked them both in the description. Most people would agree that it's always good to have a balance between style and substance, but with Kojima works, it's more like a balance between style, substance, and cinematic reference. And if MGS3 was the referential love letter to James Bond and old school military action films, Death Stranding is Kojima's love letter to 2001: A Space Odyssey and some of his favorite sci-fi action films. Kojima has said that he had initial aspirations to become a film director, but instead pursued a career in the video game industry as he found himself spending much of his free time playing games and thought the new medium would offer more opportunities than the film industry. And I'd say over 30 plus years he's certainly made the most of those opportunities. In all of his works, Kojima's inner film buff has always shined through, and why not? The man has said 70% of his body is movies, and honestly, I think that's kind of how you have to break down a lot of things in Kojima's games.
You've seen these films.
In Death Stranding, Kojima's love for movies comes out in all sorts of ways, and let's just start with the game's cover, which looks like it was inspired by this shot from the film Aliens, because it seems like we have another Metal Gear 1 case on our hands, and it involves Michael Biehn again. I know some will see this and chalk it up to coincidence, but it could also be Kojima being Kojima. You gotta remember, this is the same Hideo who, when asked why the Guy Savage minigame was in MGS3, responded, "What game?" The references are sometimes more obscure, like how your fight against a giant whale while atop a sinking environment is a callback to the end of Jaws, and sometimes they're directly ripped off, like this ridiculous villain moment from Commando.
I don't need no guns! I gotta kill you now!
I don't need the gun, Sam. I can beat you. I can beat you.
As far as narrative goes, the overarching concept of reconnecting society through package delivery belongs to the 1997 Kevin Costner film The Postman, in which, years after a major global conflict has left the United States in dystopian disarray, a nomadic traveler who becomes known as the Postman wanders through the towns in the Northwest delivering old mail. Thanks to the Postman's presence, people begin to believe that the US government has been restored. Conceptually, it's not just the Postman. The moments when you're transported to battlefields for what seems like hours to you, but is only seconds in the real world, calls back to the 1997 Jodie Foster space travel film Contact, in which the same phenomenon happens, and in both Contact and Death Stranding, the character's experience is only confirmed by the time elapsed on their tape recorder.
Let's pull the data from your cufflinks and take a look then. Well, that's all pretty crazy, but at least you're not. Timestamps in the logs support your story.
The fact that it recorded static isn't what interests me.
Continue.
What interests me is that it recorded approximately 18 hours of it.
That is interesting, isn't it?
The idea of timefall rapidly aging people or wrinkling their features was inspired by the 1975 horror film The Devil's Rain, in which the rainfall would melt people's skin.
Disgusting!
And then there's a comparison I'm surprised more people aren't mentioning, especially since Kojima has said that the film director Andrei Tarkovsky has been a big influence on him. But it would seem Death Stranding borrowed from the Tarkovsky film Stalker, not just with strikingly similar visuals, but also loosely with its narrative of wandering the post-apocalyptic wasteland. However, my favorite off-my-rocker movie comparison is that Death Stranding is just an art house version of Ghostbusters 1. Never mind you are literally busting ghosts throughout the affair, but you've also pretty much got the whole Keymaster-Gatekeeper dynamic, weird beasts that emerge from an interdimensional rift, and all this happens to awaken an ancient Sumerian god who plans to bring about the end of days.
Extinction. That's what I am.
How does that even mean?
Not to mention there's so much science jargony talk from Deadman and Hartman that you'll feel like you're listening to the Twinkie analogy.
Well, let's say this Twinkie represents the normal amount of psychokinetic energy in the New York area. According to this morning's sample, it would be a Twinkie 35 feet long, weighing approximately 600 pounds.
That's a big Twinkie.
Okay. Yeah, that one is a reach, but it's a fun reach.
The whim of a madman.
But above all others, there's one film that Death Stranding takes not just visual cinematic reference from, but narrative, concept, and philosophy. And that would be Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's no secret that 2001: A Space Odyssey is Kojima's all-time favorite film, and Death Stranding is his magnum opus homage to the Kubrick existential outer space masterpiece. But 2001 is surprisingly not so much really about space travel. That's just the cool backdrop for this meditative film about our evolution from ape to man and eventually something more. DS does contain a couple of visual references, like the equipment rack in Sam's room, which is a direct callback to the pod bay in 2001 where the spacesuits are stored. Then there's Sam himself, who is actually the ultimate Dave Bowman stand-in, one man chosen to take a journey that no one else has ever endeavored before, and the chosen one to be the bridge in evolution from man to an ascended being. I mean, the visual reference to Sam being the Star Child is very on the nose, as the first time he repatriates, they show the Ludens astronaut toy floating through time-space as a callback to Bowman's trip through the black hole in the film before his evolution occurs. which takes us to the philosophy of the stick and the rope, which may be the strongest strand that binds 2001 and Death Stranding, while adding one of Kojima's biggest literary inspirations, Kobo Abe. Death Stranding opens up with a quote by the late Japanese author from his short story Nawa, which translated means the rope. The quote states, "The rope along with the stick are two of mankind's oldest tools. The stick to keep the bad away, the rope used to bring the good toward us. They were our first friends of our own invention. Wherever there were people, there were the rope and the stick." The stick-to-rope theory applies to 2001 immediately in its opening scenes. A monkey discovers a bone, realizes it's a weapon, and uses it for defense. It then becomes a tool for gathering food, a stick that became a rope, a means of defense that became a means of nourishment. The shot of the monkey throwing the bone in the air and transforming into the space shuttle is to indicate the trajectory and technological advances of mankind's entire existence. Death Stranding has a more vague but similar moment in which Sam is brought back to the real world from the beach, and the reason his friends could find him was a gun that bonded them all, to which Deadman says it was not a weapon, but a lifeline, a stick that became a rope. That line right there, I feel, is Kojima's message with Death Stranding. The use of a gun to describe a stick that became a rope is, in essence, another of Kojima's anti-war and violence sentiments. It can be argued that most technological advances have initially started as sticks, or rather military projects, before being molded into ropes for the general population. Cell phones, GPS, even social media was all developed for military use before being seen as items to keep us connected. Death Stranding is all about sticks that became ropes. The white whale of stick-to-rope Kojima has attempted to tackle in past efforts like MGS2 is the internet itself, which was developed for military purposes initially before being used as a means of communication for scientists and eventually all of society. In the case of the internet, it seems to have become a stick that became a rope that's become a new form of a stick, which Kojima describes when talking about his feelings regarding the internet. "I always feel lonely in society. We're in an era of individualism. Everyone is fractured, even on the internet. It's all connected, all around the world, but everyone is fighting each other." The interview goes on to ask Kojima his thoughts for how to remedy this problem, to which he responds, "I don't have the complete answer. I really want people to play Death Stranding and answer themselves. I'm not giving up on it. Social media isn't just bad things. It really helped me to connect directly to people I never would have had the opportunity to. I feel lonely on it, but I can't say no." It's a pretty spot-on take of social media and the internet as a whole. We have the most communicative technology at our fingertips, yet studies have shown that we are lonelier now than ever. Death Stranding seems like Kojima's hope of reviving the dream of an internet that breaks borders rather than creates walls. And would it really be so much of a stretch for him to sneak that little commentary of his into the larger scheme of his video game narrative? I'm sorry if this feels like this segment has taken a bit of a turn, but as I said previously, 2001 doesn't just inhabit the narrative of Death Stranding, but its themes and philosophy. And you can't look at that without speculating and examining how Kojima may view the trajectory of our species going forward. Staying on philosophy though, there are some obvious connections between Zen Buddhism and Death Stranding. A brief example being Bridget's 3 forms in the game of the same self, which can be interpreted as the 3 Buddhas or the 3 Sisters of Fate. But there's so much to go into on that front, and I'm not the right person for that project. Besides, it's already been done in an entertaining and informative way with the video Samsara, The Meaning of Death Stranding by External Gazer, which I've gone ahead and linked in the description and suggest you give a watch. Wow, that was a tough knot to connect, but we did it. We've talked a lot about Death Stranding's parts that make up the sum, but for a game I've deemed to be an experiential masterpiece, it would probably help for me to talk about, my experience. And not just with Death Stranding the game, but its adapted media and community. Death Stranding is one of the most ambitious, beautiful, meditative games I've ever played, and I enjoyed every moment of it. Even with its engrossing story, I was actually more enthralled and captivated by the gameplay than anything else. The jaw-dropping landscapes and endless ways to approach obstacles on your journey never got old. And there's of course some Kojima cheeky, cringe character and dialogue choices that were made, like "My name is Cliff because I'm a dead end," or Die Hardman's unmasked name being John McClane. Then of course there's the infamous Princess Beach line.
Yeah. Like Mario and Princess Beach.
But that says a lot about a game that even its most cringy narrative parts are memorable and at least gave me a chuckle. The bizarre plot and slow burn pacing is not for everyone, but I certainly loved it, and while people are still debating about what type of game or what genre Death Stranding belongs to, I'd argue it's actually one of the better cyberpunk games of recent memory. It's just more on the side of technological apocalypse than megacities with body augmentations. I mean, what more could you ask for from a 40-hour game version of 2001 Meets the Postman, in which you hike through the pristine post-apocalyptic wilderness, reconnecting society with your arsenal of 3D printed equipment? And who else but Kojima could have made this work in such a slick fashion? The graphics, music, the whole world created are simply breathtaking and immersive. I still just marvel at having a vision of this scale and being able to tie all those loose strands together to create one of the most mind-bending, subversive gaming experiences. It's just so Kojima. And if it's not apparent by now, I'll just say it. Death Stranding is a masterpiece, and a game that I cannot stress enough that you should try if you haven't yet. It's a rare work that's a seamless blending of mediums. It's a video game that looks like a movie with a story that was written for a book. Speaking of which, let's quickly touch on the novelization of Death Stranding, which has been receiving translations over the past year. And even if you've read the interviews and emails in-game, which offer a plethora of in-world lore, the novels, yes, there's more than one, give you an insight into Sam's thinking throughout the journey, but also exposition regarding the preppers and Bridges members you meet along the way, elaborating on what happened to them during the Death Stranding or why Sam and Bridges showing up is a big deal, good or bad. If you play the game and crave more Death Stranding, get your hands on a copy or even listen to the audiobook, which are both available for purchase on Amazon. Among all my experiences with Death Stranding, I absolutely cannot gloss over my time within its community of players. Death Stranding became the tie that binds between myself and friends across the globe due to our mutual love of the game. But it's also given me a window to the different ways people view and interact with the game through the content created for it. As I mentioned earlier, if you want a deep look at the philosophical elements and meaning behind Death Stranding, I recommend the YouTube video Samsara, The Meaning of Death Stranding by External Gazer. If you want fun, unique, emergent gameplay, there's Smog Snake on Twitter. And if cool music video aesthetics are your thing, check out Ethnic Coleslaw's Death Stranding GMVs and Descartes Zero's awesome photo mode videos. And everyone that I've listed here is linked in the description, and I'd like to thank them all as they contributed big time to this project. In a weird way, this fragile bridge became its own strange asynchronous creative effort between all our different content, ideas, and views on the game. I guess you could say this ended up being a Strand type video. But my experience with the DS community has actually extended to Koji Pro itself. One of the coolest things that happened was my artwork was selected in the Ludens Design Challenge by Yoji Shinkawa to be part of the Kojima Productions 2021 digital calendar. It was honestly one of the most awesome and humbling things to happen to me, as I've been a fan of Shinkawa's work for over 20 years. Summing it up, not only is it a great game, but it's opened doors to new friends and gave me one of the coolest art accolades in my life so far. If anything, Death Stranding has been the gift that keeps on giving, and it's all been predicated on making efforts to keep on keeping on with keeping us connected. But what won't be keeping on is this video. And this seems like a good place for us to wrap things up. So I say we pack it in, go get some well-deserved rest and relaxation. Well gang, we made it. And it was probably an even stranger journey than expected. But despite that, we traveled through Death Stranding's convoluted whirlwind of inspirations, game design, plot, and philosophy, and have arrived unscathed at the other side of the bridge. And I really want to take this moment to thank you guys for watching, and especially thank those of you that have been along for the crazy trip this channel has taken from being fragile bridges to Redux Visions, and now the paper starship that carries my odd insights to you. It's been a wild ride so far, to say the least. It was a lot of fun to do this project and dive down the Kojima rabbit hole one more time, and as someone who loves films and of course Kojima games, it's always fun to go rust cold True Detective on his works. It's been awesome following Kojima's career to this point, and I hope to keep seeing him push the boundaries of his creativity for years to come. Death Stranding is an incredible game that I'm happy to see gaining more popularity as time goes by, and I can't wait to see what new connections DS creates with its increasing playership. But since Death Stranding's release in 2019, people have gone back to their favorite pastime of wondering about what Kojima may have up his sleeve next. But for now, I'm content with hiking the countryside, dropping off some packages, and hitting the slopes. My time with story mode playthroughs may be over for a while, but I'll still be messing around in this game. Just call me Strand Border Bridges. Anyways, I hope that this video was informative, but most important, entertaining. Thank you guys again, and know that your time and feedback is always appreciated aboard the Paper Starship. But I'm just gonna chill here on the beach for a while. It's pretty nice out here. Stay steezy, gang, and I hope that you enjoyed Death Stranding, The Fragile Bridge.
Sweet fucking relief.